Ladies and gentlemen, it is time. You are back with Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast, the harsh vocals of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy here with the Terminus Omega 2023 end of the year episode. You want to say anything? You want to introduce yourself or?
Oh, well, the stream just started cutting in my own, cutting in my ears. So I started hearing us played back to me. It
Yeah,
was pretty
we
trippy.
gotta turn that off.
I just did. Here I am. Okay, I am the black metal guy, suffering technical difficulties inflicted upon me by this degenerate modernity.
That's
Uh,
the problem,
m
right?
yeah, my orb waves contaminated by, I don't know.
If
Well,
if
probably hentai.
if only we
Hmm,
did this inscribed on some sort of ancient stone tablets or something, you'd be
Right.
right on top of it.
Right. Maybe in a couple years we can inscribe the year-end list on stone megaliths and leave them for future civilizations to find.
Well, what we should do is we should get in touch with one of the labels that we're close friends with, and we should get like limited cassette runs done of our Omega episodes that people can buy as
Hmm.
merch.
That's actually a pretty good. We need to do merch at some point. Yo, if you have merch ideas, throw it in the chat.
Yeah,
Um,
we've spitballed so many ideas over the years, but we've never done it. 2024, I'll get some T-shirts made. We'll actually
year
do it.
year-end tapes. I thought another funny thing would be we could take you know how we have these note documents that some people know exist, and that when I read them over, like, so I was looking back at our old note documents, this just to prep for year end, right? Being like, what did we hear this year? There's so much of it is just full paragraphs. We could just make an entire book out of those,
Yeah,
you know?
I don't think a lot of people realize just how sort of ridiculous the notes are that we take
Yeah.
for a lot of these episodes.
The death metal guys started a custom of writing a paragraph or two of full sentence sort of positioning stuff. It's basically where we spurg out so we don't do it on air. But sometimes we just spurg out. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think the
so,
spurging is part of the charm. So,
mm.
all right, end of 2023. Welcome to everyone who's watching. Thanks for coming out and joining us. This is our first time live streaming it. We figured that since we have begun live streaming, what better an opportunity to really go live, boy, than with our infamous Terminus Omega episode. This has been an interesting year. I think this is a really good year. In terms of, this is our fourth calendar year of doing the podcast, and I think that in terms of average quality of record, this is the best that we've had since we started.
Absolutely. It's kind of crazy. It was it there were a lot we covered a lot of records that just seemed obviously important in their niches, uh and many that just seemed important for the state of the art in general. Why do you think there's such a bumper crop this year? I mean, have we talked about that enough on the show? Maybe that's not even worth discussing. I think
Well,
we've
I mean,
speculated about it a few times.
you've talked about your theory that it's a lot of stuff that kind of got like derailed by COVID getting back on
Mhm.
track, which is possible. I it's I think that we'll be able to answer that question better in 10 years. It's always
Mhm.
easier to kind of see how things assemble. I mean, when 1986 happened, people were probably like, "Oh man, this is an awesome this is an awesome year of great thrash records," but they probably wouldn't know why. It's only so many years later that we're able to see,
Yeah.
that we're able to see how everything led up to
Yeah,
1986.
it's possible that it's the what we're getting is our generation of musicians, guys who are everywhere from a little older to a little younger than us, sort of hitting their stride.
Yeah, I would
And
say
so
that's certainly part of it.
I think that that'll feature pretty prominently on my list in terms of USBM's coming of age.
Well, yeah. Speaking of lists, we'd talked about this a little bit before. How was it making yours? How was that process? Since I know that it ended 10 minutes before we got on
Well,
here.
death metal guy, I always see to the pantsit. Maybe I think maybe the first year I didn't, first or second year, but since then it's just been kind of I maybe this is a cop out, but I kind of have that feeling, the feeling you just had about how do we know it was a good year. I have that feeling about year-end lists. It's like, damn, I really should make the year-end list for this year next year. Because you need some time to see what settles. For instance, there's so many things that like clearly there was a year when when I should have had skepticism as my top, or just that Ruins of Beverast record we both just ignored, even though I went on to listen to it like 45 times,
Hmm.
right? Because we were just like, well, of course this band is good. They don't need to be on our lists. Um, you know, or the Oriflamme record that didn't make my list that year it came out and has become a just something I really like.
Oh, I didn't realize you still listen to that one regularly.
I do, man. It's got a very unique sort of gritted teeth grim feel that if you're in a tough spot, it can help you. Yeah, it's very, very cool. So or very noble. So the Oriflamme record is really cool. There's all sorts of stuff that you figure out later and that sort of sets in your memory.
Hmm.
So for me, it was really, I just went through our notes and was just like, okay, what did we cover? What did I like? I put them all on a sheet. And at first I thought, oh my God, I have way too many records. Then I realized I only have 18, grabbed a couple more, and I've just tried to order them in the best way possible. I think there's yeah, I mean, we decided this will also be good context for listeners. We both decided beforehand that uh we decided beforehand that we were going to have our lists be very individual this year. In the past, we've tried to do like, give it your best shot. What do you think is the best slash most important stuff this year? And part of the fun of year end has been figuring out how much we overlap.
Hmm.
Um, there were a couple times last year where we had the same record at the same place in both of our lists,
We've
which was
had that. We've
nuts.
had that the past 2 years actually. We had that with
Hmm.
Narmaleth and we had that with Arid.
Hmm.
I'm wondering if we get it again this year because it was when I did my list this past weekend, and
Hmm.
I thought it was going to be a struggle, but once I had all the records we covered this year laid out, it was actually very clear. I pretty much had 20 records that stuck out as things that I really loved and wanted to come back to, and I put them in a list, and it was actually probably the easiest list I've had, despite anticipating it being the hardest. Because I
Was it
think
easy for you to find the priority one over the other, or just easy to get them all and roughly order them?
priority is tends to be pretty easy because I usually go from the top down. I usually order it from 1 down to 20.
Hmm.
So I usually have a really distinct idea of like the top 5 to 10 of the year. And then, the 20 to 10 slots are just sort of like cool records. I don't get that caught up in the individual ranking of them apart from, the top handful of the year. It's almost
Yeah.
it's almost easier to think of these things in tiers of like clusters of five,
Yeah, I agree about that. Yeah.
which is
The
how we usually end up doing these with breaks anyway. Is my first five are usually just like fun, cool down the line things, and then they get sort of more significant and maybe more relevant to the scene as a whole as they go down.
Yeah, I think this year I've been working from, I think the criteria we have are a little bit different each year.
Hmm.
So as always, I'm really interested in like what is an important and originary record, right? What is uh where do we see new formal innovations and new techniques? Uh and which bands are doing the kind of thing we want to hear more of. So I definitely have that statement angle. But and there are some really big statement records that came out this year, right? But I think another thing I've tried to consider is just how well rounded is it and how much have I listened to it? Um So I think that means there's some. I think a lot of the stuff in my top 10 is extremely predictable, but I've got some. The top five is I've tried to make a little more idiosyncratic. We'll see whether that makes
Well, that's
sense.
fair. And guys, if there's any audio balancing issues or anything, just let us know who's loud or who's quiet, and I'll modify it as we go.
Oh wait, yes, somebody is saying
Yeah,
balance the
yeah.
volumes, please.
So it's hard for me to tell. I think you might be a little bit louder than me, but I'll wait for someone to let us know because I can't really direct monitor right now.
Word.
But yeah, so excellent crop of records this year, and well, I guess I'm excited to see what you have. I'm almost certain I know what your top handful are. Okay, I'm quiet.
Mhm.
Let me go up a little bit. See if does this sound a little bit better, guys? Just we're gonna continue, but let me know if I'm still quiet, and I'll get that fixed for you. So yeah, I think I know what your top handful are. We did talk about that a little bit the other night with the Mormagil guys, but
Mhm.
yeah, I guess with no further ado, let's check it out, man.
All
Terminus
right.
Omega 2023 Black Metal Guy. What is your number 20?
Well, I have got Kane to be cruel.
Ah, nice. I'm glad to see it on your list.
Yeah, it was it's at 20 because obviously it toes the line of falsehood. Um, it's and it doesn't this a record that falls that squarely in the midst of the sort of art scene or culture industry really doesn't need us to promote it, right?
Mhm.
However, it was the first time I really stopped and listened to Kane, aside from a little bit on your Torture Doom episode. Uh, and, like sort of very frustrating listens when I was younger, when I was just like, this sucks.
Yeah.
And as you know, I was able to hear something more in it. I think I was struck by the passages of more or less straightforwardly beautiful stuff if you have a taste for squalling, seesawing feedback in your melodies and chords. Um, the lyrics, I mean, yeah, thinking through the lyrics with you on the show was interesting. The sort of the sort of external perspective it gives us on the cringe-inducing protagonist
Yeah.
of right. It's very art. It's arty stuff that accomplishes its work, and I think it has a uh. I talked on the show about the very unique atmosphere, like uh, being in the midst of the dusty abandoned factory on the and somewhere on the waterfront in New York, and just somehow hearing the old industrial machinery. Right?
Mhm.
It's it's a very very cool album, and it I don't know, that's a retarded thing to say. It's a very cool album. Sorry guys, I'm getting warmed up. It's a very big record. It's very big and loud. No, it's I think the it just made me stop and think about a band that I had kind of written off before then, and I think it's just obviously a great accomplishment as a record that a lot of care has gone into, and with a lot of different sides to it. I think that well-roundedness is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm glad that you talked about the lyrics. Lyrics aren't something we talk about on the show very much. I've thought about maybe when we do another live stream and we kind of need a starter topic, maybe talking about
Hmm.
lyrics in metal. You know, what makes
Hmm.
them good, what makes them bad, what are great examples or terrible examples of it. Because it's something that's explored a lot by, like regular music people, but then once you get into people that are really entrenched in extreme metal, they don't really talk about them anymore. But maybe that's something that's worth looking into again. Regarding
I've actually got a few lyrics focused picks tonight, things
oh,
where I want to,
okay.
yeah, talk about that. Yeah.
And regarding Khanate, well, I will talk about it later when I get to it on my list.
There we go. Okay, good. We can have more of a discussion
Of
after
course.
that.
Number 20 for me. This is one of two picks on my list that are actually from mini reviews that we did rather than full reviews. I think that might be a first time. So predictably, they're coming from things that I brought onto the show. This year was really a bumper crop for really good brutal death stuff. Some really sophisticated stuff, some really deliberately stupid yet arty stuff. But my number 20 slot is one that was just an absolute ton of fun, and I've continued listening to it, and I think it's the number 1 slam record of the year, and that is Orphan Autopsy's Blistering Deprived from Sanity. If any of you guys missed this, Orphan Autopsy is a Cuban slam death band that just put out their first full length this year. And it is just absolutely down the middle, hilariously heavy, has a ridiculously intense drum performance. I think all the subject matter of the band appears to be about killing infants, which is just about as slam as you get, including one song where mid-slam the instruments drop out to play a baby crying sample and then a grotesque squelching sound as though it just got stepped on. I don't know.
I don't even remember listening to this.
Yeah, it was just a mini review that we did. I want to say it was like back in April or something, but slam is something that's near and dear to my heart, but it just hasn't been doing great the past few years. And the Orphan Autopsy record is, as far as just a record that is fun to put on at any time for fans of that style, it's got no competition this year. It's anyone who's watching, who's a slam fan, check it out. You're going to have a ton of fun with it. It's silly and gross and awesome.
All right, cool. Well, I guess I don't have very much to say to that, but that's makes sense.
Yeah, it's just a fun. My 20 slot is always just like the goofiest, most fun record, usually for me.
For sure. Well, okay. So my 19 is one that I know is going to be much higher on your list, and that I thought just should be on mine somewhere because I really enjoyed it. This is the Profanatica's Crooks Simplex.
Okay.
So
yeah. Excellent album.
Yeah, it could be higher, but since I think we want to go for like super personal list this year, I just figure like, okay, this is a death metal guy band, and we will, and I know it'll be higher on his list. It was just the thing that struck me about it was just how damn pleasurable it was to listen to. I had associated Profanatica with, the sort of highly chromatic, involuted riff skeletons that you get on something like on the Have a Hedge and things like that. And I did not realize it was going to be so beefy tonally or be so focused on physical aggression, headbanging parts, or, in the words of Paul Ledney, fat bass and big titties.
Yeah, they're a much more, despite how we talk about them, they're a much more fun and like listenable band than you might expect initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was extremely fun without being in any way accessible. And I think the minimalism of it, especially this far on in the band, is commendable, right? The refusal to alter the basic formula. If there's any alterations, they're just interesting things like, ooh, a Swedish death metal riff. Which, yeah. It was also, surprisingly consonant in a way I wasn't expecting, right? There were some sort of epic gothic riffs there. It was in a way that was kind of like the Demon Sea that we just listened to. But all around, great record.
Yeah. So so it may come as a shock. This one's actually not on my list. There were several very good Primitive Black Death records this year, and I've got one further down on the list. This was actually almost a Ruins of Everast case for me, where it's like Profanatica doesn't need to help.
Hmm.
But it's also a matter of like, for me, I've listened to so much Profanatica that it's like they're judged on a different scale. Is Crux
Hmm.
Simplex competing for one of the best they've ever done? Not really. It's about middle for their discography.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
still better than 99% of everything, but I judge them differently because I've got such a close association with it. That being said, obviously a fantastic record that anyone who listens to this show is going to love. Like you said, it's resolutely primitive in the traditional manner of Profanatica, yet they still keep adding little new tricks on every album. Everybody has their own personal favorite. Mine is actually Curling Flame of Blasphemy, which was, I think, 2 or 3 albums ago. That's my favorite Profanatica record. But yeah, Crux Simplex, obviously awesome. Obviously doesn't need me to tell anyone that it's awesome. And it is also just a ton of fun. And despite it not being on my list, I'm going to listen to it regularly for years to come. So number 19 for me is something that one of those weird reversal of expectation ones where you brought it onto the show and you had some reservations about it and I fell in love with it immediately. You already know
Hmm.
what it is. This is Forest Thrall's Amidst
Oh, yep.
Pines. I don't know if I even have a great reason for why I love this album so much. You had a lot of sort of valid critique of it. The riffs can be very gestural. Sometimes they're barely even riffs. It is not melodically super interesting. But I think this is a case where something about the aesthetic and all of the way all the timbres work together and just these specific fixations this guy has, especially in the sort of stompiest, most Celtic Frost meets Graveland parts.
Yeah.
Forest Thrall strikes me as like my version of what we affectionately call the boring black metal records that you really like. This
Oh,
is
yeah.
like,
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is like my boring black metal record that I fell in love with. I just think it's awesome. I'm really stoked to see where this guy goes on following releases, and it is one of several outlaw rock contributions to my list this year. And I think this one's going to become a mainstay for me to listen to with my bros, like in more party type situations, actually.
Word. Well, yeah, I'm glad it's on the list. I think, rather than reiterating my criticisms or whatever, I will say that it had the overall impression that emerges is much stronger than the issues I found with various parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the concept for the whole band and the overall vision is there. And also after we did that review, I had a great conversation with the dude. He was, he was super chill about the criticism. He actually found it useful, and we just talked a lot about the music and about his the sort of the pagan religious undertones of the record, or overtones of the record. Dude is extremely cool and definitely the real deal. He was telling me about chanting Norse Galder to crabs, like doing rune magic in a pond. Um, so he's extremely authentic American outlaw rocker, and yeah, I definitely want to hear more from him.
Yeah, that's I am not at all shocked that he is that kind of guy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, next, what do we have up? My number 17.
18.
This one is what?
18, you goofball.
18. Oh my God, I can't count. Well, this is just more
I made these
modernity
nice
with it.
I made these nice column lists for you to make it
Oh,
easy.
I was looking modernity with its, numbers and things. Uh, um, I can only count to three because that's the only that's those are the fingers I have left. The because I keep sort of chopping my fingers off with my badly napped flint, my badly napped flintstone hand axe. Anyway, the so my number 18 is one that I think sort of in terms of the show's internal memory, we didn't end up really referencing again. It got kind of buried in my memory vault too because of the sheer around when it came out and the sheer volume of stuff this year. But it's something a lot of people have been talking about on the grams, and for good reason. I really enjoyed listening to it. This is the new one by Blutschwur. This is Blutschwur, Those of My Blood.
Mm.
On, and it is a extremely tough take on the stompy melodic black metal formula that's become so big in the US. It also has he also has a real gift for classical and folk inspired melody that most of these bands don't have. Um, there's immediate influence filtering in from hardcore, which fortifies it, and you can hear that even in the more elaborate moments. And there's parts that have um, there's parts that have the sort of elegant aggression of a Spite Extreme Wing or a Nagelfar or something. Nagelfar from Germany. Um, it was there's particular one riff on there that I just like I can think about it. I'm like, God damn, that was a good riff. Um, it's sort of we're sort of hybrid riffs that careen between different kinds of phrases. It it shows yeah, it shows a good movement away from some of the flowery excesses of modern USBM, and it's well, I don't know. It's stompy and it's about knights. Well, that's an important thing. It's not nearly as stompy as people would think, despite the fact that his label slash distro is called Armored Stomp.
Yeah,
It's much more blast and thrash focused, and I think I really like that.
yeah, it's not nearly as like absurd like as you would expect. So this one didn't make it onto my list, although it's a very good record. I just didn't come back to it. There was just a lot of stuff in this category that came out this year, and there were records that I preferred to it. But yeah, it's a ton of fun. It's definitely a cut above most of the stuff that's coming out in that category of what I just said. It's less absurd, but like absurd influenced kind of Teutonic, black RAC hardcore stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
It's definitely like much better than most of it. But I will say, I think that like if there was something I got a little burnt out on this year, it was probably that style. Like, we got kind of burnt out on Franco-Finnish stuff a couple years back. And I think that I'm like I'm ready to table this style for a little while until something really prominent comes out. You know what I mean?
For sure. Well, there's some stuff like that on my list. So, you can rest easy. I've taken care of that.
I gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay, so speaking of going back to records that we might have forgotten about this year, this is a record that came out very early this year that we both liked a lot, and I sort of immediately knew would be on my list, and managed to stand up through the rest of the year because I've continued to listen to it just because it's so melodically pretty and it has a certain mood in black metal that I really appreciate. This is coming from Holland, and this is Shavat with a Chroniken uit de Nevel. I just really like this fucking record, man. I just think it's super neat. I think that it's melodically really complex and really dynamic. I love the mood. I love black metal records with a kind of witchy mood where it's dark but not really overbearing. There's still a sort of like celebratory quality to there. That juxtaposition of like Dionysian with the occult. It is something that I really enjoy. Love the female vocal samples. Love his use of synths. Love the way that Floris is so good at using post-black riffs in a proper black metal context. This is my Floris record for the year. I think that basically every year there's gonna be one on there, and yeah, I think that this is one of just a small handful of like very straight up, direct, just down the line black metal records that made it on the list, and I think it's great. I think it's an underrated entry in that scene, that black metal circle from Holland.
Yeah, dude, I completely forgot about that one. There are some really memorable riffs on that as well.
Hmm.
It's I think for me it was a little too close in some ways to stuff he's done in Asgrow,
Hmm.
but it was very different from the last couple Asgrow releases. And definitely feels more sort of Norse and Satyricon-y.
Yeah,
Um, uh,
it's the album. That's a good point. It's the album Satyricon always threatened to put out but never did.
right, right. It's like just the cool riffs from Mother North. The it also has in it, but it incorporates his the more post-black or more subtle romantic melancholy Dutch stuff he does is still there in a cool way, which is I think part of what makes that unique mood in the riffing you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, I like the Nightside Glacier with the Aurora Borealis, and there's witches dancing around a fire mood. Very
Oh,
specific, but he nails it.
I like that one too, actually. Um, okay, so here's another one that here's where we start to get to. I mean, it doesn't take long before you get to start to get to stuff that has a real sort of comprehensive artistic ambition to it. Um, this next one, my number 17, is Gromoverge is Drevla.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, that is a. I haven't really come back to it. However, I really liked it. The it's a it's a it, for those who didn't hear that review, Gromoverge is a project of the guy who wrote most of the Nocturnal Mortem stuff,
No,
right? Or most of
Temnoser.
Temnosaur, sorry. Yes, fake news. Who wrote most of the Temnosaur stuff, and or most of like their classic material, and it's assembled here without some of the more excessive Slavic symphonic black metal trappings. He said it was supposed to be a very direct, just pagan metal record. Uh, there is still a very loud synth flute, which I take to be a charming feature of the style, but I understand the death metal guys' reservations. The thing that holds it back from being further up the list, I think, just is, well, basically the first track is bad,
Yeah.
right? There's a track where he just mysteriously commits to some really stale rote riffing that kind of just alternation between a couple riffs, one or two of which are pretty bad, and it just stays in the mix for too long. And the flute isn't really doing much on that track, but it's still very in your face. So it has a sort of serious flaw in it, but if you started the record after that, which you totally could because it is like at least an hour long, it is a marvelous adventure that could remind you of the more exuberant, naturey Crota stuff, or the better parts of Volknut or whatever. But is it has that sort of Bathory scope to it. Uh,
Mhm.
Epic narrative songs, and the thing that makes it unique, the thing that makes it special is maybe also a thing that makes it not on my top 10, which is that it's rather remote for black metal, right? The production is kind of it's a sort of clear, crisp production that is neither very heavy or very raw. Um, and the music is highly narrative in a way that means it's more you are seeing and you're more witnessing the action than in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's very
and
very clean and digital.
it's very clean and digital, and it feels like a storyteller kind of record. So it's atmospheric and it is kind of a journey, but it doesn't have the um, immersive confrontational aspect that you get in more proper black metal. Um, so it's really cool.
Yeah, this is one that didn't do a whole lot for me, but it's trading in a style of Slavic sort of symphonic folk black metal that I'm just not that interested in. I've never
Hmm.
been really into Nocturnal Mortem or Temnazor or most of those bands. Um, I think that I would have to guess that it's a very good execution of that conceit for people that
Hmm.
are really into it. For me, it was just kind of labored. It is a very long record, and there are passages of a ton of repetition. So I understand that's how the game is played. It's just not to my taste. But for anyone who is looking for something akin to, and not in a backhanded way, a blackened Legend of Zelda soundtrack kind of thing. I think that it's very good for
Oof.
that. No, no,
Important
you get what I
Important
mean.
reminder in the comments, dude. Landfish says, dude was also responsible for a lot of the songwriting on the last Forest and Nitberg albums. That's true. He wrote Nitberg's Nagelraid, which is a masterpiece. So there is that. I think, and the thing you were saying about not being a fan of the style,
Hmm.
I'm not either, but this sold me on it, I think, or this, so because it deviated just enough from the sort of keyboard formula and some of the like really goofy folk metalisms,
Yeah.
it caught my attention, right? Hence, I wasn't a fan of it, hence my inability to tell, your Temnosaurus from your Nocturnal Mortems.
That's fair. No, I think that it's probably worth checking out for
Mhm.
everybody. But this one just comes down to just like a personal difference, probably.
For sure, for sure.
My number 17 is on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum in that it is a gnarly, purely chromatic black metal record that is about constant attack. A record built purely out of blast beats and vicious Marduk style riffs. And it has something that is now mandatory for all future warlike black metal records, which is a 2-minute passage of nothing but blast beats and air raid sirens going
Oh
off.
yeah.
That's right. This is Samath with Grebeberg. Holy fucking shit. This might be the most aggressive record of the year or maybe the last couple years. Jesus Christ, dude. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. I think it was 2021 where we both had the Kayak record on
Hmm.
our end of the
Hmm.
year list in very similar slots, actually. I think it was like 12 and 11 or something like that. And Kayak is sort of the more Beharit, Demoncy, Profanatica inflection of this guy's work, and Samath is his main band, which is, I mean, you could basically describe it as being derived from Panzer Division Marduk, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's more I think we've both talked about the influence of Nidin on his work, which you can
Mm,
hear in Cake too is the weird thing.
mm.
But I think it's very much in the Marduk and Nidin yeah, Nidin and what else? Like a few
Enthroned,
others of the
you know.
Enthroned or yeah, the you know, a few others of those Scandinavian war metal bands from the 90s.
Yeah. Like at this point in my life where I've been listening to some kind of black metal for damn near 20 years now, I don't have a ton of time or patience for records like this, but there's one or two every year that really grab me. And in this case, it's the Samoth record. It's just so fucking aggressive. It is one of those records where, through some accident of songwriting or timbre, it feels faster and more vicious than almost anything on the planet. I don't know, like, especially as a guy that loves brutal death, this is a black metal record that stands up against brutal death in terms of like sheer abrasive intensity. And I think I'll be coming back to this one when I'm in the mood for something like this pretty regularly.
Well, I will share my thoughts on that when it shows up on my list.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. So we're now getting down to 16, and we'll do a break after this one.
Yeah, we can do our usual, take
quick,
five after each
just break,
block of five. Yeah.
So now, having for my number 16, a returning old master that made I think both of us re-examine this band and understand them a lot better. We've got Rune Magic,
Okay.
Beyond the Cenotaph of Mankind. So this was an odd record in that it was a very sort of reticent record. It does not want to easily be understood or enjoyed. There's something odd about it in that it's a doom death record that doesn't really sound like most of the things any of us associate with that term. What we figured out as we listened to it was that the main line of influence there is really coming from things like Candlemas and other Candlemas and Cathedral and other kind of epic doom of the late 80s and early 90s. And so it has more to do with trad doom than much of doom death, which is more like slow death metal.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a stubbornly dark record that refuses to be particularly it's epic in the sense that it is sprawling and demands attention, but it is not epic in the conventional ways of delivering something big and bombastic. It has this so yeah, you can trace it's definitely death doom, but you can trace its roots back to the 70s. It also and yeah, they were structurally interesting songs, which often opened up really big spaces and then emerged from them and slipped between riffs in an elusive way. It also brought me back to the early Rune Magic stuff, which sounds really different and is just, I mean, amazing stuff. And that is much more like almost bulldozer black metal, just extremely swaggering, stompy stuff rooted in Hellhammer and Celtic Frost, but suddenly with the kind of riffs you would have gotten in Sacramentum, because of course he was the drummer of Sacramentum.
Mm-hmm.
So an interesting record by someone who's been doing it from the very beginning and has never lost touch with the underground. The last couple of Rune Magic records hadn't been very interesting. This one is a much more concerted statement, and I was glad to cover it.
Yeah, this is definitely a really interesting record. Didn't make my list at this point. I think I've decided, like you said up front, I understand Rune Magic a lot better now, like what they're after. It's still not really to my taste. Just for Doom Death, I'm always going to lean more in the direction of, the sort of bludgeoning Ripakolu type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, now I understand Rune Magic a lot better. They're a band that I never really fully understood what the songs were driving at, but after hearing this one, as you said, hearing that its heart is really rooted kind of in the 70s, there's so many of these heavy metal and traditional doom metal isms that I was never really able to pull apart from their earlier work. This definitely, even without having heard the last couple records, this feels like a sort of definitive statement or like a new chapter unfolding for the band. So even though it's not really to my taste, this is another one where I'd recommend everybody check it out and make their own determination. Because if nothing else, it's definitely structurally really interesting and they're very good at what they do. So number 16 for me before break. Maybe a little bit of an odd choice, another record that we might have forgotten about, but just remarkably good and well composed, and it created one of my favorite moments on the show this year, so I had to include it. This is The Howling Void with Into Darkness Evermore Profound. For those who weren't around for this, The Howling Void is the funeral doom project of Ryan from Pneuma Hagion, Intestinal Disgorge, and 20 other really cool projects. And the surprising thing is that when he chooses to do funeral doom, he does a very melodic, very sort of romantic and symphonic style, which is usually like the stuff that I really dislike in funeral doom. But there's something about the way his songs pour out this really deep, legitimate well of sadness and a sort of organic, naturalistic minimalism that you can tell is more directly related to Skepticism and Theragothon than a lot of other bands in this style. A lot of these sorts of romantic or symphonic funeral doom bands just sound like Peaceville Doom slowed down even further. And there's some resemblance to that here, but this is also much more in touch with the roots of like traditional funeral doom from Finland. And I don't know, this one really stuck with me. And as far as best moments of the year, when I realized you can sync up a passage of this record perfectly with the death of Boromir in Fellowship of the Ring, that nailed it. That was just one of those lightning in a bottle moments where we created this perfect intersection of two pieces of art, and it was just super awesome. So, anybody out there who's a funeral doom fan, or even just sort of like a fan of the more melodic death doom that's willing to dip their toes into slower stuff, I would definitely recommend it. I think it's really cool.
You should put that on YouTube.
Oh,
That
the
synced up
lined up.
thing.
Yeah, I should do that. I should just make that
We
and put
should
it up.
you should make it. We can upload it under Terminus and put a link in the description for this.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Um, that almost went on my list too.
Hmm.
I remember liking it a lot and a lot more than I expected. But I couldn't remember enough about how it sounded, if that makes sense. It didn't leave enough of a lasting impression on me,
I
but
got
it's
it. Yeah.
probably something I could enjoy a lot more of if I went back to.
Oh, it's
I tried to
it's
see,
definitely a genre exercise.
is that the only funeral doom we covered this year?
No, because there's I've got another one coming in a few slots actually. Unless you want to
Hmm.
call Khanate Funeral Doom, in which case that also.
Nah, not really. No, that's like, I mean, okay, torture doom, subgenre of funeral doom, arguable, but well, I guess subgenre. Maybe for Kane, but we know that's not really
Yeah.
funeral
But no,
doom.
we didn't cover a ton of Funeral Doom this year.
Yeah, because I remember we did the Shape of Despair record at the very beginning of the year, but that came from last year.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. That makes a lot of sense. We're gonna take a quick break, and we will be back with you shortly, gentlemen and ladies.
All right, we are back and ready to continue with our next block. Black Metal Guy, what have you got for number 15?
Number 15, I've got one that you introduced to me and to the show. This is Paimon Gate, Butcher to the Devil's Court.
Yes! Fuck
This
yeah.
this one is just really sick and evil, man.
It's so good. It's so fucking good.
It has a just the sheer sustained quality of riffing is incredible. You can hear all the building blocks of the riffs because they're almost all just made of power chords and leads. There's no sort of mysterious textural stuff happening. And they often are sort of rhythmically simple runs that you can that just have this incredible you can just hear his songwriting decisions as he moves, if that makes sense. Like if you've written sort of minimalist black metal, you can hear what he's doing, and you can hear how every single interval and every single note change just counts and does something cool to the riff. And how he puts these turns and involutions in unexpected places, or shapes a line in a way that gives it more force than it would otherwise have. It's very physical songwriting. He knows what sounds heavy. And he also understands the strengths and limitations of each kind of scale, right? We talked a lot about how he was using a combination of Aeolian, which is what we've been calling Dorian, Aeolian and Phrygian modes. So switching between the more sort of stern Spartan vibe and the more sort of slinky Asiatic demon vibe. And doing that even within a riff. It is very, I guess it's very like songwriter's music. He's a riffer's riffer. And it is and he's also just, like Profanatica, he's just a fan of big, chunky power chord tone, which I really like. Oh yeah, that's the other thing, the right hand work, right? Although there's not like fancy rhythms in the riffs, the basic rhythmic building blocks of the music are rock solid, and he understands how a rhythmic shift between riffs or a shift of rhythmic inflection within a riff can sort of make or break it, right? It is really crisply demarcated right-hand picking. And that also puts, when he sustains a note, you can hear the force in it because it's not just right? It's it's just great. I don't know. I assume this one's on your list too.
Yeah, this is my representative for that style of like primitive US Black Death, and several entries down I'll be talking about it. But yes, phenomenal record, one of my favorites of the year. It's just going to be on constant rotation for the rest of my life.
Nice.
Number 15 for me, this is the other one that I'm pulling out of a mini review that I brought onto the show. As I said, banner year for Brutal Death, and this one is making it onto a lot of best of the year lists for Brutal Death people in general. It is very technical and insanely brutal, and features just some of the worst guitar noises that I've heard in several years. This is Nithing's Agonal Hymns. A grotesque body horror brutal death record. Like even all the lyrics on this album are about like the human body undergoing like torturous transmogrification through occult rituals and stuff. It's and the music sounds like it. I noted when I reviewed it that there is a lot of stuff that sound almost derived from like noise rock, just very, very strange textures that I've never heard anywhere else. I I know the guy when he was talking about it. He had been talking about it a little bit on Facebook, and he said that like he had recorded it like a year before it was released, and he said, I think somebody was asking him what he had done in a particular riff, and he's like, fuck if I know, dude. I just kind of like wrote it while I was doing it. I don't remember how to play any of it. But a lot of it sounds like there might be additional guitar lines that are just him doing pick scrapes and slides almost at random. It's totally chaotic and grotesque and weird, and in a year of great brutal death records, this was one of those great ones.
Yeah, that one is cool. I like between that and the trichomoniasis, which I assume will be coming up at some point for you. It's been cool to hear the avant of brutal. I guess, avant brutal death is going several places, right? And one place it could go and can go and has been is more towards, say, ulcerate or DSO type stuff. But it's been really cool hearing these guys on the fringe just push it explicitly towards noise, which basically makes good on just something what we've been insisting on since we started this show, which is the abstract and timbral and noise or industrial dimension to a lot of brutal death. Mm-hmm. It's great just like really hearing it now.
Yeah, I think we've talked on the show about how brutal death is itself starting to fracture into a few different pathways toward the future, and I think the one that I'm the most excited about at this time is like this sort of new standard elite noise brutal death stuff.
I had another idea about that just now, but I'll save it for when we do the trichomoniasis.
Okay, sure.
All right, cool. So next up, we've got 14. All right, this one is one I know will be on your list. This is Passéisme Alternance.
Mm-hmm.
It is,
of course,
it is the first French black metal record to make it onto my list, but not the last. But it will be the only one that is actually from Russia. Americans have been told that Russia's economy is collapsing and any minute now it will come down and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the guys from Passéisme are, calmly going to the gym, powerlifting and writing riffs. All as far as I can tell on metal Instagram, Russians are completely unperturbed. And this record is evidence of that. It is, it's basically sort of everything I hoped the band would do after their last one, but in an unexpected direction. That is, the first one had a tendency towards riffola. It felt like there were too many notes per riff, and that yet the basic melodic phrases, the basic phrases were often kind of stock, or the overall shapes of the melodies were kind of stock, with some important exceptions. And there was also a proximity to power metal in some places, which is an important part of the antic sound, but I felt like it was a limitation for Passéisme. Mm-hmm. Alternance is still... Okay, so I was just saying, Passéisme has this sort of florid Gothic quality to the riffing, this Gothic cathedral detail that's essential to the sound and that is still there. However, it's been significantly stripped back so that every note counts, even in these very elaborate phrases. And there's even more of a focus on the toughness of the band. Mm-hmm. I think the tone is harsher. You really value the toughness of the first one, and here it's definitely intact.
Yeah.
But they've done some surprising things, like focusing more on driving repetitive passages, which I really like. Some sort of hypnotic looping mid-tempo stuff. And overall, they sound more explicitly like Peste Noire, which must have been I think this has been a year for us wrapping our heads around Peste Noire's influence. Mm-hmm. And because they weren't a favorite band for either of us back in the day, I think we've had maybe a limited view of how they sounded and not recognized their influence in certain places. So I feel like Passéism sounds more like the early Gothic medieval Pest Noir stuff, the very earliest records, like
Hmm.
even just the first one. Uh, and it also sounds more like Swedish Black Death. There's a depressive undertone to it, but it is never depressed. It never succumbs. It has it evokes the image of tragic affirmation, right? The cover is, yeah, Pan grinning as he whistles his blood curdling flute as a man and a woman approach each other in the garden, right? So
Hmm.
there's a kind of there's a sort of dark Dionysiac side to it that is very cool. It's a record that um yeah, it sort of suffers ecstatically in a cool way.
Yeah.
Um, and sort of never succumbs to a sense of depression. It's it could easily be higher on my list, but for whatever reason, but just for completely contingent personal reasons, it feels to me like it's your baby, and I think it'll be higher on your list.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it is higher on my list. I'll get to it. It's a phenomenal record. I mean, just after how much I loved the first one, I just knew that the second one would be another best of the year for me, and it's on there. And I'll give more elaborate thoughts when we get to it.
All right.
Okay, so number 14. Speaking of French black metal, which
Hmm.
I'm now guessing is on your list, though I was wondering if you were going to forget about this. This is a record that I think got on my list just out of pure riff by riff and lead by lead strength alone.
Hmm.
If we were going to judge albums just purely on like average riff quality, this might be like top five of the year.
Hmm.
But overall, this is just phenomenal. This is Karn with Condamnus.
Yes.
Yeah. This one is not one that I've gone back to a whole ton over the course of the year, but when I've gone back to it, I've been paying like really close attention just as a guitarist. I think that this record is a just an incredibly deep well of material for guitarists. And I mean, this is just a guitar band. This is a band that is oriented around the most majestic and traditionally French parts of like Deathspell Omega, but I
Hmm.
think they pull these parts off with more consistency and just at a higher general quality than DSO ever did.
Yes.
This is it's structurally complex music, but it's almost minimal in its like focus on like obsessive dual lead guitar work. So you can see how it sort of intersects with, the old Guitar Hero style of something like Dissection, but
Hmm.
the material within is just purely French black metal. This just might be the best articulation of this very precise guitar style that I've ever heard. So I would say everyone should listen to this, but especially just because a lot of our listeners are also musicians, guitarists, you need to hear this record and you got to take notes because these guys, this is not a record that's gotten a ton of attention as far as I've seen
No.
online, but like, dude, musicians are going to be talking about this one for a long time, I think.
Yeah, man. Well, guess what? This is in my top five.
Oh, really? It got that high up?
Yeah, yeah. It's just so good.
Yeah, it's an
I
awesome
forgot.
record.
I had forgotten about it for a minute and then went back to it and was like, holy shit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
it's just awesome. It's like it's got the depth that people like us need, but it's also just so on its face, like explosively awesome. And
yeah,
it
yeah,
it's
yeah.
what other people hear when they hear Storm of the Lightsbane, but it's for us.
Hmm.
Like something like what Dissection put out was like maybe not deep enough to maintain our interest like well into our metal listening, but we've got bands like Karn here to fill a similar role.
For sure. Um, well, yeah, I'm very glad that's on there. Yeah, maybe that's sort of the dark horse of the list
Yeah, yeah,
for
that's on
both of
there.
us. Um, so let's see. Next up, we have I was wondering where would show up. I still won't really know what I think about this record until next year. However, at number lucky 13, it is Cromlech's Ascent of Kings.
Yeah.
I couldn't not have it on my
Well,
list,
of
man.
course.
Yeah, it's I made some serious criticisms of it in the review, which led to a a furious duel of wits. We discussed those criticisms with the band themselves, or 4 out of 5 of the last lineup on our interview with Mormigil, who, if you haven't heard, are the reincarnation of Cromlech after Baron left the band. So we did a sort of Ascent of Kings post game with them and discussed all that. That's been discussed enough. I think what um I definitely like it better now than I did when I first heard it. I think part of it is simply that I was in a pretty harrowed place in my life when I first heard it. Might not have been the best time, but more than that, like the I've tried to understand it more on its own terms, right? Clearly, as we discussed, and then as the band confirmed, the operatic paradigm is really important for Cromlech.
Hmm.
It really is patterned on opera, and that means it's organized in a way that is different from what I normally expect in extreme metal, and is much more like old heavy metal, right? But for me, I guess I'm of the mind with music that the sort of the modernist philosophy, or even romantic in some ways philosophy, that music should be medium specific, right? That it doesn't need to tell a story. What it's doing is it's inducing a series of passions or moods in the listener. It's directly acting on the listener, and what you apprehend is its structure, just the structure of those moods and the shapes of the melodies and harmonies themselves. And of course, that will evoke of course, you can think of it as a certain kind of process. It can evoke certain kinds of landscapes or actions, but primarily it's this, I guess, I don't know, you could say Dionysiac force acting on you and evoking Apolline vision, but not in a kind of not in a way where you're perceiving plot or narrative in more directions, right? You like to talk about songs telling stories.
Hmm.
I'm often skeptical of that sort of thing. Cromlech does it in a really concerted way because of that operatic influence. Um, and it means that the songs are because of this focus on narrative, it means that when Roman thinks a song is done, is very different from when I might think a song is done,
Hmm.
right? Or the kinds of shifts in the sort of moments where a riff is deferred or diverted or whatever in order to produce some sort of effect later on, where passages are sort of broken off or ended. These all have a kind of narrative function when they might, from the perspective of writing ripping extreme metal songs, they might impede the song. They all have a kind of narrative function. Uh, and so I guess I was sort of just, I guess in the initial review, I just sort of called that paradigm into question. I was like, does this need to be like opera? Maybe that's a bad idea. Um, but fundamentally, that's what it's doing. Um, and it asks for a different kind of listening, which is more external, right? You're being less possessed by the music, and you are more put in the position of a viewer.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's just a different kind of thing. And I guess I could argue on philosophical grounds, or, in a lot of ways, I guess really I might have been asking of this kind of heavy metal, I might have been asking it to be black metal, right? And
Yeah.
Solstice's New Dark Age really just does the black metal thing. Um, Cromlech is trying to do it works on those terms as a record that sort of possesses and immerses you, or that you can feel sort of channeling through you. Uh, Cromlech is really sort of shifting that paradigm and making us observers rather than sort of uh, subordinates or participants. Um, and it's and I think I have to just accept that as part of the musical paradigm and project. Same with the vocals, you know. I think there are weird places that Kevin's vocals sound weird, especially in terms of how they harmonize with the guitars because of the vibrato. However, as we discussed, he really he says he wasn't trying to imitate opera. However, he was trained by an opera singer, which makes me think, okay, there's some substance. There's this is not. There's a concerted, concerted and valiant effort to pull this off. And listening again, the vocals make more sense to me. And yes, I like um, the earth shaking and passion in them is really important.
Yeah.
Um, and once you accept the narrative paradigm of it, I think I can come around more to your way of seeing it, like the tragic quality of the record, right? About, as you said very memorably, the record is about strength, strength, and more strength, and its ultimate rending asunder.
Hmm.
Uh, it. I argued, okay, maybe the record does that a little too much, like it accidentally falls apart under its own weight of its own ambition, right? And so maybe the record sort of embodies that tragedy. Well, I think they're more in control of it than that, and I think I think if you think of it as a narrative, then the ways that the music attempt sort of the things in the structure that might seem self-interfering or needlessly elaborate or diversional or whatever are digressive are really sort of essential to that narrative in which there is strength laboring under an immense weight that ultimately none of us can bear, right? So I think I have a lot more, and in that light, the sort of titanic ambitions of the record and whether it can fulfill them, even the flaws of the record start to become qualities in themselves, right? Like I still don't understand why you need an intro to the intro to the intro, or why there's so many instrumentals or whatever. There's a lot of all my initial complaints stand. However, I think I understand them in a different context where I'm accepting, okay, this is a different paradigm of thing they're trying to do. It is theatrical, it is tragic, it is birth of tragedy, Wagner opera in metal. I'm ready for that, man.
Yeah. In short, is the Black Mo guy confronting the single longest haired record we've ever had on the show and coming around on it a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one also made it onto my list later on, so I'll give some of my thoughts when we get to it. Although you covered a lot of territory there, so I'll probably just back up some points of yours. But yeah, I think it's phenomenal. Number 13 for me. Black Metal Guy, you said, did we cover any other Funeral Doom on the show this year?
Uh-oh. What
Yeah,
did
what
I
about
miss?
Rigor Sardonicus Praeparet Bellum? Oh! The hilariously heavy, perpetual, like, nuke going off in slow motion. What do you even say about this band? Rigor Sardonicus has been a favorite of mine for a lot of years. We covered this very early this year, so it was easy to forget about. Unless you've listened to it, at which point it's just instantly memorable. I don't even know how to describe Rigor Sardonicus to people who haven't heard it. It is like a silent movie, like horror film soundtrack pitched down into like sub-bass frequencies with a guy gurgling over the top of it. It is an idea of heaviness and and evil that is so hilariously juvenile it comes around back to being legitimately creepy. It is music composed of the simplest minor key and like tritone riffs possible, all ideas that you have heard by the end of 1987, but they pull them off at like 40 beats a minute with so much pitch shifting and so much reverb it becomes avant-garde. I don't know, man. I was going to say Reverum Immolact. I don't know, weirdly comparable in certain ways. Rigor Sardonicus is hilarious and awesome and totally sincere and totally tongue-in-cheek all at the same time. There are no bands like them. There never will be any other band like them because nobody else could just, like, do this. So, yeah, it had to be represented. I love this record. I love this band, and everyone should check them out.
Well, Death Metal Guy, I just forgot. It totally is Funeral Doom. I just forgot that it was a Funeral Doom record. Exactly. You know what? This was in the list I had, and as I juggled the terms of the list around, it somehow got bumped.
I got it.
And I didn't even realize it. So what I'm gonna do, Death Metal Guy, you see that number 20 on my list?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's another band. It's a slow band from New York. Get fucked.
It's Rigor Sardonicus
time. Rigor Sardonicus with the steel chair.
That's fair. If Kanate's going to be bumped by somebody, I think it makes sense that it be them.
Yeah. The Stone Cold Steve Austin of extreme metal. Rigor Sardonicus. Yeah, what an awesome record.
It's just it's so ridiculous. You can't, like, it's impossible to describe. You can't review them. You just have to show people one of the CDs. You just have to be like, just fucking listen to this thing. Like, the idea is so ridiculous and awesome. It's like, I think I said something to the effect when we reviewed it that it's like a band that you imagined when you were like 14. But like by the time you get around to playing instruments, you're not going to do that anymore. These guys wrote the idea for this band in their fucking notebooks in high school, and then they went on and they made the fucking band, and they did it for like 30 years. Like,
the other thing I want to add about this is, since I just threw it on my list, right? It's the thing that makes the Funeral Doom term reasonable is that the undertone of beauty wouldn't exactly be it, but let's say rough-hewn majesty and some of the chording. Some of it is very kind of titanic and massive. There's a mountainous weight to it. There's very they're using epic intervals, sort of Aeolian stuff, and like chords with cool ringing inverted power chords. The textures are amazing. The way the chords sort of digitally crumble as they ring out. There's a, despite how brutish and minimal it is, there's a loftiness to it. It's real, just, it's like watching massive, watching gigantic creatures march across the earth. It's so neat.
Yeah.
And as a Long Island band, they are sort of heirs of winter in a way.
Yeah. What a singular band,
For sure. Absolutely.
All right, go ahead.
So,
12.
Number 12. We come to, on my list, Samoth Graveberg.
There we go. Yeah.
Yep.
Fucking sick.
What can I say that you haven't? Well, despite our comparisons to Marduk, the song structures are much more sophisticated, right? And that includes a real sense of compositional freedom, like the Death Metal Guy talked about, how we just have the 2-minute, essentially drum solo, but it's like a noise drum solo, where we have just dive bomber sounds over it, which is just crushing. But more than that, there's a real he layers, he sort of stacks simple riffs in ways that form arcs of their own. So like riff to riff to riff to riff, you can hear sort of escalating tension and an overall progression being traced in all these separate melodies. It's a there's a lot of textured black metal chording, which is one of the things that links it to Nidin. There's some more triumphant or glorious sounding moments in it without letting up the fury at all in the overall performance. The tones are amazing. Just a very harsh and cold, but heavy and just substantial guitar tone. Really buzzes. The drums are obviously awesome. Jan's vocals, we you know, I think we maybe, I can't remember if we talked about it or not. We often forget to talk about vocals, but Jan's vocals are unhinged,
Yeah.
sort of kind of like what's the God, what's the Angel Corpse rasps,
Mhm.
basically. Yeah, it's an awesome album that reminds everyone that this is supposed to be extreme music. And it's a guy who's been in it from the beginning, is as old as many of the founders of the genre, and is producing something. He's gone completely in the opposite direction, where his music has only gotten more intense, more aggressive, and more focused as he's gotten older, which is just awesome.
Yeah, Jan.
It's
Jan is
really
a real
really
one.
Jan's a real one. The record is inspiring.
Yeah, it is. But I said it before. I'll say it again. Just one of the most blistering records of the year. Just totally, totally cool. Totally reminds me what was cool about black metal when I first started getting into it. Even though my tastes have like gotten away from this style, this reminds me why I fell in love with it to begin with.
For sure.
So yeah, glad to see that on both our lists. Next one, another black metal record. So this is kind of an odd pick. Like, this isn't one that I immediately thought would be on my list, but, you know, as I thought about it, it just kept creeping higher and higher. And, you know, I don't think this is a record most people would think to include on a best of the year list, but I gotta say, why not? You know, this is an album that explores a style of black metal that's nearly forgotten at this point. That is powerful and affirming and exciting and incredibly fun, and there's no reason we ever should have stopped making records like this. And remember, they are still fucking ice. Imperial Crystalline Entombment, Ancient
Nice.
Glacial Resurgence. Fuck it. Why not? Why shouldn't it be one of the best records of the year? It's one of the most fun listening experiences that I had all year. There's riffs that are sick. It's incredibly fast. It's densely technical in a really interesting way. I did an interview with Ron, one of the main guys behind the band, and it was really interesting to talk to him and bounce ideas off of him about how maybe this sort of Norsecore USBM style is really more like a sort of strange subgenre of death metal rather than black metal. And I think, like, the reality is, even if, like, the aesthetic might be kind of deliberately silly, pound for pound, these guys are executing a traditional style of black metal riff better than most of the so-called listens, is better than the original back in the early 2000s. 20 years later, they come back all the stronger for it. They're about to start doing live performances for the first time. Can't wait to see video of that shit. I don't know. It's awesome music. Why did we ever stop doing like blast beat only USBM? There's a reason it existed in the first place, because it's fucking sick. And so many years later, now that that style is all but forgotten, it feels almost avant-garde now that it returns. I don't know. I think this is a really fun record, and I think that more people should listen to it seriously as an exercise in a style that, you know, just isn't around much anymore.
Yeah, I'm glad it's on your list. I considered it for mine. extremely fun to listen to. Another big thing we talked about was the thrash influence all over it.
Yeah, yeah, all that Euro thrash.
Mhm.
The parts of Immortal that actually matter to Ice. You know?
Right, right, yeah, like, oh, that's true. I bet Ice likes At the Heart of Winter a lot.
Yeah,
Because
they.
that's the one that's sort of Abath doing just his sort of creator and destruction riffing.
Yeah, well, in the interview I did with Ron, we talked about because everyone had always said that Ice sounded like Immortal, but they
Hmm.
really don't for the most part. In terms of the way they design riffs, they're far more chromatic in death metal than most of Immortal. But there's aspects of Immortal like that Euro thrash tendency that bear through. It's not in the bulk of the music.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you got him to say that on record that he agrees with that take. Yeah, they really don't sound that much like him, or there's a similar outline, but then when you zoom in on it, the most of the riffs are not Immortal riffs. Um, yeah, no, that's also a record that is admirably committed to just being like heavy all the way through,
Hmm.
heavy and loud and nasty all the way through.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Mm.
All right,
Uh,
let's do our 11 slots and then we'll take another quick break.
all right. At number 11, it's Includur Gavogion with Honan Blade 2. Uh, this was the year's best hermetic goblin black metal, I think. It is a this is from a mysterious Cornish Cornish scene that revolves around the only member of this project. And he and it's part of the inverse solar requiem is the name for the label in the scene, the circle generally. And this is one of the flagship projects. We finally got to cover them on the show. Um, it's a record that you could easily say, okay, well, this is just sort of necrotic, weirdo, one man black metal. But the record is so long and so well rounded, it really defies that. It's not a genre exercise at all. Um, we heard influences from all over the map there. It basically just, he's listening to all of the classics of 2000s raw and underground BM stuff and integrating it in a really compelling way. Um, Something I forgot to mention in the review itself, like we talked about comparisons to Druidgun stuff, really the Swan Road, which is my favorite Druid record, which has this sort of um sort of very bold and bright harmonies at times, but always with extreme dissonance and tension in them. You get a lot of that there. I also compared him to Ostats, the very, the bizarre Basque band at Owl's Blood. There's long, sort of spacey passages that really work, um, and also plenty of stomping punkish energy. It's really cool, and you had a nice comment on it embodying the antisocial tendency in black metal
Hmm.
that the sort of the defiant outsider aspect to it that often gets can sort of go missing in pagan BM or the NS scene.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, just the idea of like you're supposed to be on the fringe of something, not at the center of it.
yeah, it's not about being a joiner. It's and I remember the thing I was trying to clarify on that is that idea is easily there will be people who I say, oh yeah, of course, black metal is about resistance. Black metal is about sort of no, that's not what we mean. It's not about sort of reacting against oppressive forces or anything like that, but it is about it being a force unto oneself within any social order. And about being a sort of straining at the bounds of uh, straining at the bound, sort of a power that exists. The unruly forces within a pagan society or whatever, right? It's not about just as you say, just being in the mead hall with the boys.
Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
I this is one that I left off the list just because I knew that it would feature on yours. This is a
Mhm.
really excellent record. it's not something I would be able to go to often just because it has such a weird mood that's so far off of my regular listening habits. It would be difficult to find the right place for it, but it's just obviously excellent. The general riffing style is so fucking weird. Like just this guy's idea of black metal riffs is at once like perfectly recognizable as being derived from Graveland and stuff like that, but doesn't actually bear one-to-one resemblance to any of it. It's very singular, and I definitely love the hermetic weirdo aspect. It's doesn't sound like him at all, but it reminds me of the vibe of something like Furze, of just like black metal that is unhinged even within black metal, like being the weird guy even in the pagan group or the witches coven. You're like you're the guy that might be taking it a little bit too far with the animal sacrifice. So yeah, no, I think it's an awesome record, and I'm glad that it's on your list, and it probably just should be on the Terminus aggregate. I totally second that as being worth investigation by anyone that's into the show.
Cool.
So number 11, this is one that's almost certainly on your list, and this starts actually a grip of a handful of outlaw rock records that are featured on my list. This is a band that is returning to the show, and I had my reservations the first time a little bit, but now I think that the band has reached a much more complete form, and that is Grave Pilgrim with The Bigotry of Purpose.
Nice.
Just obviously one of the best records of the year. Riff by riff, it's incredibly strong. I think that in terms of just like moving up a standard deviation in quality from the last material to this might be one of the biggest jumps I've heard a band make. This is a really fully realized project now, and it's clearly just like the standard bearer for outlaw rock in terms of like being both excellent and very visible to the internet, the metal scene in general, what have you. A lot of the more referential stuff to shit like Pest Noir has been kind of shucked away at this point, leaving Grave Pilgrim sounding a lot more themselves. The last material was good, don't get me wrong, but it was perhaps too connected to its influences in places. Now it sounds like these guys have a lot more confidence, and as a result, they've made a record that's just like leagues better than prior work.
Yeah. There was also a lot of explicit gesturing at like other kinds of like non-metal influences. Like there's a lot in the music just referenced Old West stuff or Blood Meridian or whatever. And that sort of more explicitly referential stuff has been cut out and it's just taken for granted as part of the music.
Yeah, I think that was a great move on their part. Because I wasn't sure. After I heard that first record in the EP, I thought they were kind of cool, but that was one of those cases where I didn't know what the band was going to do. It was like either they were going to figure it out and they were going to like really become themselves, or they were just going to collapse into like a band that's just about references. Basically, they were just going to turn like full Instagram.
Me too.
There we go. I'm sure we'll get to it in a moment for you. So,
yes.
All right, guys, we're going to take another short break and we will be right back. All right, guys, we were back in Black Metal Guy. Do you want to explain what happened here?
Guys, I got carried away and I had Samath on my list twice. Now I figured out this is why Rigor Sardonicus got bumped. And so instead of bumping Khanate, I've now stuck Rigor Sardonicus in at a respectable 15. And moved Samath up to the second place I had listed Samath, which is at number 10, which makes sense for me because that's a great album.
You're really getting to see how the sausage gets made today, guys.
The live stream is exposing everything.
All right, so that makes sense then. Okay, so that's all correct. So I guess we'll just start with my number 10 and we'll go from there.
Yep. All right.
Okay, so number 10 for me, kind of continuing this this grip of outlaw rock records I'm going to be covering is one that I'm certain is on your list, which can actually be described in a lot of the same ways that I described the Grave Pilgrim. This is a returning band whose first record I wasn't entirely sure about, and I wanted to see if they could find their own voice a little bit more, and they did, and it's awesome, and it is Strix Ascesis with Becoming Thunder.
All right.
Which I assume is going to be on yours.
Yes.
This is an awesome record. I prefer it just slightly to The Bigotry of Purpose, although I think that anyone that's into this style should just check out both. This is cool because it's not really black metal anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I also feel about the Grave Pilgrim. I think we went back and forth on that a little bit, but basically I think that as this style of outlaw rock develops, we're starting to see more and more guys that are comfortable with sort of shucking the remaining connections to black metal. And actually, one of my critiques for Grave Pilgrim and Strix Ascesis both would be that I think that at this point, the raw, scratchy production style is sort of a holdover affectation from black metal. I think it would be cool to hear this music produced like cleanly and powerfully. But Strix Ascesis moved more in that direction. So for those who haven't heard that record, the first Strix Ascesis was a lot more kind of jangly, and, had some sort of overt, although I guess unintentional, like indie or emo-isms that now with better production you hear were unintentional. Becoming Thunder is like powerful. It's powerful and thunderous and American, and I associated it with a lot of stuff like 90s sort of like the heaviest edge of alt-rock stuff, Helmet and Faith No More and Alice in Chains. And actually, talking to the guy behind this project, we found out he is a really big Helmet fan. So that was cool to hear. There's stuff that has like greasy, heavy groove parts. There's ecstatic, like lightning bolt tremolo riffing. It's extremely varied, but it all centers around this core feeling of just like pure force and energy. And it doesn't really resemble anything else in extreme metal. Like, this is one where the outlaw rock thing, it's like, it's the only way you can describe this music, because it's not a part of any of the traditional genres anymore. And I'm very excited by it, and I'm really looking forward to even more material from this guy. I just want him to get a little bit more production value, man. Just give me a little bit more. Let's hear these things with like the sort of scope that they deserve to be heard in.
Yeah, so this is very high on my list. I loved it. A couple little comments. So while we're focusing on the heavy 90s heavy metal and hard rock kind of influence, another band name that he mentioned, he said he couldn't believe we didn't mention Tool. And the part that I thought like, oh, this is like his Pete Steele vocal on Death Gaze or whatever, he was going for a Tool vibe there.
Oh, so probably like Undertow Tool, like really old.
Yeah, and it makes sense with the heavy rhythmic stuff, right? The sort of choppy chug stuff.
Yeah, that does make sense. I just associated it more immediately with the sort of post-grunge stuff.
For sure. And as far as also the Tool thing, this, I think, as far as there's only one other thing that really sounds like this record, which is the best parts of Cobalt,
Yeah.
which are hugely influenced by Tool and Neurosis. They're generally a bit slower, and they don't have the kind of fried Slavic black metal ecstasy. But this is really picking up. Cobalt was kind of a evolutionary anomaly, and but there was so much there you could build on, and I feel like this guy's really picking up where Cobalt left off.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. I mean, Cobalt is sort of the weird glimpse into the future of outlaw rock that we didn't recognize at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and of the side of it that instead of jangly can be sort of chuggy and rhythmic and have a hardcore or kind of Tool or stench convulsion to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um.
I guess we'll talk about it even more when we get to it on yours.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a few more things to say. I'm glad it's on your list and glad it's so high up.
Yeah, it's a great record.
So, all right. Now we're getting down to the wire here. So after boofing it with Samoth, we now come to my number 9. Uh, I wasn't sure where I'd place this on my list. Then I went back and clicked on a couple tracks today just to refresh myself, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. I love it. So we've got Der Tod of die Landsknecht with Wir fürchten weder Tod noch Teufel. This is the best Absurd record, even though it's technically not released by Absurd. It's sort of the fulfillment of everything Absurd was pointing toward in terms of, black metal that's rooted in RAC and hardcore, but where all the melodic forms are coming from an authentic sense of German folk and medieval music. It also has some advantages in that the fast parts are much faster. It's more agile. I think the sense of the melodies are a little more nimble sounding and sound really clearly linked to folk song. The track Frühlingsluft und blauer Himmel, which is like blue, white, something like fluffy clouds and blue sky, like clouds and blue sky. It's just a exuberant, and I gotta say, despite despite most people would associate this band with, hate. That song is just exuberant and energetic and full of a kind of love of life, and it's pretty cool. Even if it is about just sort of smashing skulls with your Zweihander under blue sky, right? Listen to the birds chirping as you dice the peasants. It's a really it also, as the death metal guy observed, has it's not afraid of the whole school of absurd and related German NS and heathen stuff always had a proximity to folk metal, basically. Mm-hmm. And that was a little bit of a dirty secret, right? Folk metal was like the girl you couldn't bring home to your parents. And these guys have just embraced her. It's got a folk metal or pagan metal or metal he runs. They also do a tribute to, at a time when it seems like this part of the scene is kind of in a pissing match with Werewolf for whatever reason, which is really bizarre, right?
Yeah, that is odd.
The Black Vault is an endless, as you would expect, is an endless autistic purity spiral, right? But yeah, going after of all people, one of the guys who helped build that whole world of metal. But at a time when a lot of these people are in a pissing match with Werewolf, they have done a tribute to him covering his Legion Werewolf, which was his Absurd tribute.
Yeah.
And they knock it out of the park. It's just better than the original because it's by the band themselves. You know what I mean? It's awesome. It's sort of the song that the original was pointing to. I don't know. It's a great album. And it's kind of cool to hear a band that has obviously been really important and influential for a long time, but never totally knocked it out of the park for either of us, finally hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. This one almost ended up on my list. I figured it would be on yours, so I didn't necessarily need to include it. One of the most fun records of the year. Totally absurd and high flying. Absurd in both ways. It is kind of like you said. It's the final like resignation or acceptance that this stuff is spiritually just kind of power metal. And I think that's awesome. I think that it's cool that it's cool that this sort of German Schlager metal thing is accepting exactly what it is now, rather than like fighting to be more black metal than it needs to be. And I think it bears out in that like it is better music as a result. It's yeah, it's like it's you never the promise of this stuff was always that it could be Wacken music. But
Yeah.
but nobody was willing to just like to go that extra mile and to make it Wacken music. And these guys did. And as a result, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Next year at Wacken, I hope.
yeah, next year at Wacken, get the drum machine on stage. Just fucking do it. Yeah. Whatever, man. All right, guys, I know that we had a little connection issue a little bit earlier. Can someone just type something in the chat? Let me know everything's good. All right, so
signs of life.
Yeah, somebody give me proof of life out there, just so I know that this is actually still live streaming. Because I never trust things to reconnect, but we'll see. Anyway, so number 9 for me. Okay, we're good. Number 9 for me, black metal guy. I have to confess, with this one, I have cheated a little bit. This record is from the last week of 2022. We did not cover it. We weren't able to hear it until 2023. So I have decided that this is an honorary 2023 record. If anyone wants to argue or dispute this, we can meet up in a Walmart parking lot and fight it out. But this was definitely released too late to make any 2022 year-end list, so I think it's fair. This is something that ends up being an outlaw rock record, despite coming from a very different tradition. This is a phenomenal album that I was listening to today that, again, riff for riff, is one of the best records of the year. And yeah, I don't know. This one's really special. I think this one is like, I'm realizing more about it every time I listen to it, and it stays so like vital and enthralling. There's a real power to this music that's hard to describe, and that is going to be Necropol's Yoga.
Yes.
What a fucking record, man. There's something about the way this guy writes. There's something about... You know what it reminds me of? I was listening to it today, and it reminds me so much of Ludomeisel, which is just like a pet band of mine that I'm so fixated on. Anyone who's not familiar, Slav black, but just like totally focused on elaborate lead melodies and these like piercing... powerfully emotive riffs. It's almost like, you can imagine like older Imha Tarakat must like pull some stuff from Ludomeisel. Listening to Necropol feels the same way as listening to Ludomeisel for me. It's accessing this sort of like high-minded black metal headspace that could be pretentious in less capable hands, but this guy is just such a sophisticated writer and has such a mastery of the guitar that it's almost unfair comparing this stuff to anything else. This is a very straight down the middle record in terms of like what it's seeking to execute. It is a French black metal record that is also influenced by Slavic black metal, and it's no more and no less. But in terms of sheer execution, this is going to be like a constantly replayed thing. I'm going to be studying it and like learning some stuff on guitar, and it's Yeah, this is mind blowing, and it's also mind blowing in the way that it is only so impressive after you've listened to black metal for a lot of years and you realize just how difficult it is to write riffs as direct yet unexplored as the ones you hear on this album.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, the riffing is quite understated.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the fanciest riffs are the ones that are of least interest. Because but not in a bad way, just that they're used as kind of a they're used to get places. It the amount of riffs per song is pretty crazy, especially considering it doesn't get cluttered. And yeah, it's very adventurous. It's gonna be higher on my list, so I'll talk about it.
Oh, okay, so we both cheated, so that's fine then.
Oh yeah, I forgot it was even from last year. Yeah, this is obviously from this year.
Yeah, it counts. Well, yoga is eternal, you know.
Yeah, yeah. For a minute, I thought you were gonna say Manticore, which would have been like a really sort of manly choice. But
I'm far too effete for that. It's gonna be Necropole for me.
uh, but yeah. Okay, we'll go to the we'll go to the next. At number 8, one that I'm sure will be higher on your list. Uh, Sort of an undeniable triumph from this year. It's Gridlink Coronet Juniper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great
Yep,
record.
gotta be there. Um, and this is one of the ones where I don't have anything to say about it that you wouldn't have to say about it musically. We've talked about how it's sort of Gridlink coming full circle to their Japanese screamo and heavy metal influences, while still really writing songs like a grind band. That was sort
Mm.
of the focus of the review, and writing riffs. And Takafumi writing riffs like a grind, right, in a weird grindy way, sort of recontextualizing riffs by other great guitarists in a way that makes them his own completely. The But what I want to emphasize here is actually the lyrics, which I don't think either of us had read.
Hmm.
The lyrics are by John Chang, who just left the band. Uh, um, they are. In, I just assumed it was going to be sort of fun, wild anime shit with a bit of melancholy or whatever. It's way more than that. Um, I'm gonna pick just a basically like a random one to read. Let's go. Oh, Ocean Vertigo is cool. Uh, yeah. No, we'll do Nickel Grass Mosaic. Banquet tables set for reunited specters, hemorrhaging eyes iris with misleading prophecy. Here among the remains, sitting mute in slow motion, passing through the living as if we are grotto, nickel grass mosaic. A palm reading traces my steps, and I will sleep no more. I prefer the presence of ghosts, a recurring dream that's not mine to share. Vertigo relayed and spelled out in bones, a lost court following steps on the floor. Rings of salt and dead Zippo wicks, the orphans of shrikes impaled on the blackthorn. Who must hang them? Why, the honest men.
Yeah, it's if you haven't seen it before, yeah, Chang's lyrics are always like sort of classic, like you know, like page 99 sort of like grindy emo, and they're awesome.
Well, they're just poetry. I mean, here's another one. They're also informed. I think I've been following his Instagram, which is like he just posts cool stuff and seems like a cool dude. I'm pretty sure he's a veteran, and I think that's at the back of a lot of these lyrics.
Oh, I had no idea.
That's the vibe I get. I'm not positive. But he's either that or like a schizopilled survivalist type. Or or both. But here's Pitch Black Resolve. I believe in a desert called peace, a balm of fire carried over horizons, measured in minutes and meters, forward with pitch black resolve. A man of my scars, I willingly gave an offering measured in years. The hard winter knows hope is the last thing a man does before he dies. I believe in a desert called peace, a veil of fire I paint across horizons, measured in minutes and meters, forward with pitch black resolve.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. So yeah, it's it's a brilliant record on every level.
Yeah, it is a phenomenal album, and yeah, it's further up my list, and I'll talk about it. But yeah, I mean, in short, it's like a perfect record. I mean, it's just yeah. I mean, it's like you could not change anything about it and improve it. Number 8 for me. Okay, here's where we start getting into the place where I'm just going to be repeating a lot of records that you've talked about. Number 8 for me, because I think this has just become the traditional slot for this kind of album on my list. There is no place to put the Weirdo Extreme Doom record of the year, so I guess you put it at number 8 with Kanate's To Be Cruel. I am the based Khanate enjoyer of the podcast. Every criticism of Khanate is accurate in that it is like only sort of tangentially metal, and it definitely has a scent of New York art hipster about it. That's completely accurate, but it's also just incredibly heavy and emotionally scouring music that is unlike just about anything else out there. I really love Khanate as a band. There is an argument to be made that this is their best album. After listening to it some more, my appreciation of it has only increased. It feels like in the years gone, I don't know, they just sort of found more things to say. I guess they went through more withering vicissitudes of everyday life. You know, I think that by the end of Kanate's first run, they were sort of like, I don't know, maybe they'd sort of run out of personal tragedies to talk about or to explore, but in the intervening years, they've replenished their wells of misery substantially, and as a result, they've come out with just this like grueling, arduous endurance test of an album, like all of their records. But we talked about it on the show, but this one was definitely special to me because we sort of agreed that this was probably a record about a divorce or about a relationship going sour. And I split up with my wife about a year and a half ago now. And so many of the feelings explored on this record and in the lyrics were feelings that I had. And I appreciate the naked ugliness and the... I don't know, it's hard to describe. There's something like intensely uncomfortable about how sort of like pathetic and petty and mean this album is. It's a very disturbing record, but not in any of the ways that I am used to from so-called disturbing music.
He grasps after power in a way that's sort of self-undermining, right?
Yeah. There's something like deeply ugly about like very basic parts of the human spirit here.
Yeah, there's a sadism rooted in weakness.
Yeah. So I don't know. I've got a real thing for, I am this sort of obnoxious art kid trapped in a metalhead's body sometimes, and I have a lot of time and appreciation for some of the things you're a little bit more tired of exploring. But anytime a record or any piece of art is able to explore this very like this ugly undercurrent to everyday common emotions, that's always something that's very exciting for me. And To Be Cruel does that, and I think it's just an awesome record.
I think it really is. It really is profound at what it's getting at. And to write lyrics that make yourself into a character and you make your character look really bad.
Yeah.
To that extension, make you look really bad. Not in a not in a pop star, oh, I'm such a bad bitch kind of way. Like, or like pop star male, right? Like, oh yeah, I cheated on you. I
Yeah.
feel bad, right? It's but to really make yourself seem like a miserable, bent person,
Yeah.
is that takes a lot of courage, right? And
Yeah, I was
it's
about to
very
say
different.
there's some staggering artistic bravery going on to
Yes.
out yourself as like a piece of shit in this way. You know?
And doing it as a creepy, doing it as a in this sort of kind of, it's clear that what's going on is lyrics about this is regular people interacting in personal life. It's very different from the way that May Knock outs himself, like says, "I'm a piece of shit."
Yeah, yeah. When he's
You
like
know,
a heroin addicted vampire.
right, exactly.
It's a little bit different
Like,
from just like being angry that your wife's shit is still in your house, you know? Yeah, so cool record that I will listen to. I will hopefully not have to listen to in the future, you know?
yeah, true. A record also just as a tangent. This is sort of a question mark for me, but a record that this compares to on some levels is Great Falls. The Great Falls record that came out this year, which is they're like noise rock from the Pacific Northwest, but they're on Neurot. So it's very like Neurosis-y. It has a lot more beauty and depth and much heavier, longer songs than most noise rock. So it's more metally, without being metal in a way that would make it less what it is.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to check it out.
It also has really kind of crushing divorce lyrics, but they're very different.
Okay.
There's just some sort of potential comparison you could do.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'll have to check that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What do you got?
All right. What do I got? I don't know, man. I like keep switching them around as we talk.
Seriously.
Oh yeah. So here we go. We're gonna do um we're gonna do Brett Walda's
All
of
right.
Heathen Doom summoning the gatekeepers.
What do you? Oh, okay, yeah, I knew this would be on there somewhere.
Yeah, this isn't. This is just a. I mean, for those who didn't hear that review or whatever, Brett Waldas is a one of the very few bands that is understands what was amazing about Amebix. Not just the sort of chugging stench guitar work, but the um, indomitable medieval or Iron Age British spirit they're in. An older, a pre-Norman way of life in the UK that was in England that was less monarchical or centralized aristocratic and relied more on sort of stout freeholders organizing themselves and maybe being ruled and not in any sort of nonsense democratic way, but not in any way that would conform to modern ideas of anarchy, but a more primordial idea of anarchy, as in people living in a world as a tension of forces and standing on their own 2 feet, and hierarchies emerging sort of organically and on a decentralized level, right? So the Brett Waldas really evoke that, the Saxon war thane, defending his freehold, and the music is, and that's very much an ideal for Rich Walker of Solstice too. And the music is sort of you can hear all the stench core in it. There's a lot, but it's bent towards at once more sort of D-beat stuff and hard rock. A lot of times you noticed like old, really early Motorhead, and also at the same time more of epic doom stuff. Like at times they really because Brett Waldes, they're called a doom. The name in the name they're a doom band, but it's really coming out of this stench tradition, and so it's made doomier. It's slowed down. There's more deliberate, slow chug stuff, long, winding medieval harmonies that take a long time to unfold. Really authentic folk ear, but also you can tell these guys have just listened to a ton of, I'm sure they like, you know, the records by Bastard and Crow from Japan, or, that they listen to newer sort of, Martyr Dode records or whatever. Lots of like sort of loping, epic D-beat stuff. And also the spirit of Bathory you can hear throughout it. It's really cool. The lyrics are amazing. I'm not going to read lyrics here, but they are just often crushingly pessimistic lyrics about the state of modern Britain and by extension the world. And the most memorable one is just about sort of total ecological collapse and the last people left, which is just a very classic 80s stench vision. And nevertheless, they slog defiantly onward. The music it feels laden, sort of like it's a bit like the Cromlech record. The Cromlech record has this tragic feeling of strength's ultimate rending asunder. Brett Waldes has this feeling of all is lost and yet here we slog. Mm-hmm. There may be nuclear fallout outside, but you're still throwing on your chainmail and going to the pub in your gas mask. And it's the music evokes that resolute, pessimistic but resolute spirit very well. They're extremely memorable songs. I listened to it. It's one of the things I listened to the most this year. I got stuck in my head all the time.
That's interesting. Yeah. This is like a purely you thing. Obviously this one didn't make it onto my list. That being said, it is extremely cool. What I would like to bring up to people is that these songs are so varied on this album. It struck me as a sort of like almost guided tour of British guitar music. You've got one song that's a more definitively like British hard rock thing. You've got another one that's more like pagan black metal. You get another one that's more into like traditional epic doom territory. There's a real breadth of musical ideas going on here, and they all center around the same concept. They all sound like they belong to the same band, but this is also not a band that is concerned with rigid homogeneity in the manner of most extreme metal bands. Probably just because these guys are older and they come from a different sort of musical tradition. I think it's really cool. Probably a bigger interest in amoebics and those related things is like a prerequisite to get super into this. But I think that it's really neat, and I'm glad that you brought it on the show, and I'm glad it's on your list, because it's definitely just so unusual, and it's so far from the usual thing that we cover. And I like it when we have the opportunity to explore stuff that's a little bit more far afield than we typically do.
For sure. Talking about it with you was really fun. I mean, I think I guess in terms of if I could sell this to anyone other than people who are already, into amoebics or whatnot, the other market might be just people those of our fans who really like old heavy metal.
Yeah.
Because it has some of the wandering song structures and guitar digressions and hard rockisms that you find in that stuff. And if you listen to it from that perspective, or like as a trad doom record, you might not even notice the amoebics thing, which is to me like an essential part of the band. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways you could listen to it, all of which are sort of valid. And you probably picked up on the more extreme metal stuff. I picked up on the more rock oriented stuff, and both of those are correct, just because there's so much going on. Number 7 for me, a record that is almost certainly not on your list, but I would vigorously argue to be on like an aggregate list for both of us, and it may be more important or significant than the albums after it on my list. Insanely cool, really forward thinking, really dynamic, and resulted in probably some of the best things ever said to us by an artist that we've reviewed. This is Afterbirth's In But Not Of.
Oh, yeah.
Just, man, a record that's almost hard to talk about just because what it's after and what it's doing is so ambitious. For those of you that didn't hear, Afterbirth is a band that was almost like, back in the day, back in their original demos, they were instrumental in sort of developing slam death as we understand it. And upon their return many years later, they've become this progressive, brutal death metal band with such a kaleidoscopic form of melody and such an elaborate array of influences, they're almost impossible to pin down. There's stuff on this record that is very aggressive and burly, brutal death. There's stuff on this record that sounds like Deftones or Tool, and these things will intersect with each other in fascinating ways that you've never heard before but feel like completely naturalistic. That's the thing. It's rare that you hear a record with such far-flung influences mesh together in a way that never feels like novelty or never feels like a forced songwriting exercise. As we talked about on the show, this is the kind of band that could launch a young guy's imagination and just like make him pick up a guitar. This is an album that will create musicians. And as you brought up, it could be a record that takes the place of something like in our youth that like Opeth or Agalloch did, where it becomes this like definitional sort of band for a sort of alienated young guy in high school.
Where you can hear, where there's a whole range of extreme metal stuff that you get this taste of, right? And it opens up all these different styles to you, but you hear them all as related, right? Whereas like neither of us like Opeth or Agalloch, but like for a lot of people, those were really important bands.
Yeah, and a lot of those
had this.
Yeah, and a lot of those people went on to make great music. There's tons of friends of mine who are brilliant musicians and songwriters who still say that Opeth is one of their favorites. So clearly, there's something to it.
And it's also wild that the Afterbirth record, although it has all this depth that comes from somebody guys who've been listening to music so long and who are around for this very capacious 90s and early 2000s music.
Such a breadth. I mean, there's riffs on this that sound like they're from 1985, and there's riffs on it that sound like they're from 20 years in the future. It's crazy the amount of range on this record, and I think it just might be one of the most exciting things I've heard in death metal. In terms of like prog death stuff, almost nothing touches this in terms of like sheer imagination.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming up to number 6. Before we get to number 6, Mr. Rockhorse, some guy with a sheep emoji, requests that we say meow on stream. Do we want to stoop to this level?
Meow. But, I mean, Wilkins is next to me, but he won't do it. Sorry.
Well, that's the trouble.
Anyway. All right, number 6.
Yeah, we'll say meow more for donations. All right, and now the next 5 records on my list are really just each one of them overlaps with at least another one. In many of them are like sort of attempts to write the same record. What these all are is really, really incredible underground black metal records, and a fuck ton of them came out this year. At number 6, we've got the return of the the stellar sea eagles of black metal. It is Norway's Kaivum with Culture.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, the this is a, I mean, the way you described it was really the best. It's a, although it comes on as this very, in the way that their nature did, as this extremely forceful, um, obviously aggressively nationalistic, um, sort of heroic and vengeful music, right? It sort of frequently sinks into, not sinks isn't exactly the right word. It shifts into depressive mode constantly. There's this struggle between the basic drive at the heart of the music and something weighing it down, and and an immersion in this sort of an immersion in the pagan spirit of yore rising up into the modern world suddenly gives way to a feeling of separation from that world and a feeling of grief for what's been lost. Um, and it's one of the records that sort of cements the what we've talked about as being the NSBM DSBM sort of crossover at the heart of both genres that happened in the early 2000s that has really shaped the more consonant, sort of melodically directed black metal today. Um, it really plays like a DSBM record in the vein of Nyctalgia, the more sort of angry martial DSBM like Nyctalgia or the early, very earliest Drowning the Light, or as we played at the end, the wait, I'm now cursed to always forget this name. The Australian band with the Abyssicate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
It,
you notoriously can never remember Abyssicate.
why?
I don't
It's
know.
the but there's an abyss in my memory. But it has many of the songwriting tricks of their last one. For instance, like change ups to just barreling double bass sections that are extremely nasty. It still has the kind of um, majestic, mountainous riffing that they're picking up from and exaggerating from bands like Ulver or maybe Gorgoroth or something like that. Um, but alongside that, they'll just let these they'll move from that into these sort of long sequences of meshing chords that are they're really just like DSBM chording. Um, it's This record probably could have been more revelatory if it had come out. Well, I don't know. I think the fact that it doesn't sound, there was this long opening, kind of really influenced everything that happened in BM since that last record came out. And I think that they're returning with something that is very different from what was expected, keeps it really vital. Uh, and also they've changed. We thought they had kept the same vocalist, but he changed styles. They have changed vocalists. This guy really performs like a DSBM vocalist, not in the sort of self-loathing wimp way, but in the sense of a histrionic grief and anger and and a sort of theatrical procession of emotions with a huge range. There's um, powerful sort of screaming vocals and then more sort of declamatory stuff. It's Yeah, that's an important part of the record. Yeah. Did this make it on your list?
This one didn't make it onto my list. I did like it, but this is one that still kind of confuses me. Just because when I heard this, and I remember in the notes, I just wrote like this is a DSBM record. This is to me this just scans as a purely DSBM record, and I wonder if this is a strange case where You've noticed things in like extreme metal, like sometimes there will be a sort of genre drift that occurs.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, obviously this isn't as like problematic as something like the Friendly Cat thing, where a bunch of NSBM bands have just drifted into becoming pop punk bands. But
Right, right.
in the same way that like so many of the people that listen to those are unable to realize that they're just listening to Cali skate punk now,
Yeah.
the Kaivam almost feels like at first, but this is just like clearly a DSBM record to me, and like a pretty good one, and one that I enjoy. But I guess I'm just like, because I'm not as acquainted with nature, I'm not picking up on maybe some of these prior things that inform this record a little bit more. I think that it's very cool. I think riff to riff, it's super strong. I think that it's a little bit trudging at times for my taste. Even saying that as like a DSBM guy, it's like there's certain tracks. I think that certain tracks on this album land a lot harder than others. So it feels a little bit uneven to me, but overall I really like it. I'm just kind of curious to people's response to it. It's like, tell me in the chat. It's like, do you guys just see this as a DSBM record? Because that was what I heard immediately when I heard it. I think it's interesting to see the different way people perceive these things. So,
Right, so
yeah, with that, let's take one last break, and then we'll get to our top 5 of the year.
oh wait, I thought you were gonna do a 6.
Oh, shit, I probably should do a 6, shouldn't I? My bad. I got distracted. Okay, number 6, and then we'll take our break. So, number 6, you've talked about it already. This is an incredible record that I just really love, and it is so impressive that in a year where Profanatica and Demoncy both released records, this was the best of that primitive US Black Death style. It's Paimon Gate with Butcher to the Devil's Court.
Yeah.
Holy fucking shit. Aesthetically, this is a record that is just completely mastered. You know, so this is the main guy from Prosanctus and Fairy doing another project, and it is, we covered the first demo a year or two ago, which was awesome. And then this album comes out with just complete mastery over its own aesthetic. This sort of like ghoulish martial Eastern mysticism, this sort of like, you know, desert devil worship stuff. Riff to riff, it's incredibly powerful. This guy is making new Master and Deathstrike riffs, basically, which should not be possible, but here we are. All the music sounds the same in the way that extreme metal is at. This is a record made of such simple parts, but by a guy who has such a mastery over this style. It's not really comparable to anything. There's actually a lot of that on my list this year. A lot of like just perfect executions of certain ideas. Like, you know, the Karn record is like that. Or, you know, the Necropole in a way is like that. Paimon Gate is just a perfect execution of that primitive US Black Death style. But somehow, even while hewing really close to the origins of that style, it sounds completely unique. I couldn't confuse this for any other band, even though all of these bands kind of sound like each other. I just think it's insanely cool. I'm never going to stop listening to this fucking album. And, like, this is an album where if he just stopped the project here with this record, it would be fine. His work would be done. Like,
wow.
People that are really into this style are going to be talking about this forever. And I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this, so I hope that this builds a following over the years as, like, a real gem of this Profanatica Demoncy style.
Satan's Golden War Dragon.
It's got a song called Satan's Golden War Dragon. Like, what do I need to say beyond that? Like, that is the selling point for our audience. All right. So with that, now, you want to take a break?
Satan's Golden War Dragon. Wait, let me get one more drink of water.
Gorgoroth.
Mm,
Satan's Golden War Dragon. Is that song title of the year?
absolutely.
All right, guys, we're back. And we got somebody saying Gorgoroth in the chat, and that's important. When I originally started that joke, I want to let everyone know that's something I literally do. I will sometimes just say Gorgoroth to myself, like alone in my apartment. I think it's the coolest band name that there's ever been. It's the hardest sounding word ever.
Gorgoroth.
Gorgoroth. I mean, like, holy shit. Has there ever been a more black metal sound than Gorgoroth? God
Yo,
damn.
can we get some Gorgs in the chat?
Can we get, yo, I need all my boys to Gorg.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So, top five. Let's get to it. This is what you've all been waiting for, guys. The definitive lists of best records of the year.
All right. Number 5, a sort of a refined and prismatic record from France.
Oh,
It is Necropol's Yoga.
so good. Fuck, man.
Really good. Uh, to summarize my take on it from the review, this is a record that it really it's not called yoga just because Julius Evola yoga ascesis it's not a vibe. It really is about that and about the self-discipline and asceticism of yoga and implied by yoga. And it has a meditative quality to it. This record refuses easy pleasures, and it refuses the kind of immersive, transporting energy that you might get even from the last Necropole record, which was a kind of blazing solar assault where the music was spilling over itself to, vanquish the foe. This is much more restrained. And musically, it plays from initially start focusing on the individual riff. The individual riff might not hold your interest from riff